The dashboard clock read 11:42 p.m. when the flashing red and blue lights pierced the darkness of Route 114. Officer Bradley Jenkins thought he had pulled over just another easy target in a luxury car. He expected compliance fear and a quick stroke to his own fragile ego. What he didn't know was that the man behind the tinted glass of that dark blue BMW was David Henderson, the newly appointed director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And worse for Jenkins, every single word, every threat and every movement was being live-streamed directly to a federal command center. The rain had just begun to fall, casting a slick, oily sheen over the asphalt of Oak Brook, Virginia. It was one of those affluent, deeply insulated suburbs just outside of Washington, D.C., where the manicured lawns stretched out like golf courses, and the streetlights were designed to look like antique gas lamps. David Henderson adjusted his grip on the leather steering wheel of his 2026 BMW 760i. At 58 years old, David was a man who carried the weight of the world on his broad shoulders, though his posture never showed it. Just 3 weeks prior, he had been sworn in as the director of the FBI, capping off a 30-year career that started as a beat cop in the freezing streets of Chicago, moved through the grueling ranks of the DEA, and finally into the upper echelons of the Bureau. He was the first black man to hold the permanent title. His days were now consumed by counterterrorism briefings, congressional oversight committees, and the crushing bureaucracy of the Hoover Building. Tonight he was just a husband, trying to get home to his wife Sarah after a grueling 14-hour shift. He was driving his bureau-issued vehicle. To the untrained eye, the dark navy BMW looked like the personal ride of a wealthy tech executive or a hedge fund manager. But beneath the sleek exterior, the car was a rolling fortress. It featured level B6 armor, plating run-flat tires, and a classified suite of surveillance technology known internally as Project Argus. A mile behind him, a black Chevrolet Suburban containing his specialized FBI protective detail maintained a discreet distance. David had explicitly requested they give him some breathing room tonight. He just wanted to listen to some old-school jazz and clear his head before pulling into his driveway. Sitting in a speed trap just past the intersection of Elmwood and Crestview was Officer Bradley Jenkins. Jenkins was 32, sporting a tight buzz cut and a chip on his shoulder the size of a cinder block. He had been with the Oak Brook Police Department for 8 years, during which he had racked up an impressive 14 excessive force complaints. Miraculously, or perhaps predictably, thanks to a deeply entrenched police union and a sympathetic former chief, every single complaint had been buried, dismissed, or settled quietly out of court. Jenkins viewed his badge not as a shield for the public, but as a crown. He prided himself on what he called proactive policing. To the residents of Oak Brook, he was the guy who kept the undesirables out of their pristine neighborhoods. As David's BMW glided past the speed trap, going exactly 3 miles under the 45-mile-per-hour speed limit, Jenkins's eyes narrowed. Through the heavy rain and the glare of the streetlights, Jenkins couldn't see the driver's face clearly. But he could see the silhouette. He saw a black man driving a $150,000 car in a neighborhood where the median home price was $4 million. In Jenkins' mind, the math was simple, prejudiced, and immediate. Jenkins flipped on his cruiser's computer and punched in the BMW's license plate. In a standard vehicle, the system would immediately return the registration details owner's name, address, make, model, and insurance status. But David's car was federal property. When Jenkins hit enter, the screen flashed a strange code. Restricted. No data available. Refer to agency override. A smart cop would have recognized that this meant the vehicle belonged to a federal agency, an undercover unit, or a high-level government official. But Jenkins wasn't a smart cop. He was an arrogant one. "Stolen plates," Jenkins muttered to himself, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Got a smart-ass who cloned a restricted tag for a stolen Beamer. He slammed his cruiser into drive tires, squealing against the wet pavement as he pulled out of the hidden alcove. He didn't turn his sirens on right away. He wanted to ride the BMW's bumper to intimidate the driver to watch him sweat before dropping the hammer. In the cabin of the BMW, David noticed the aggressive headlights rapidly approaching in his rearview mirror. He checked his speedometer. 42 in a 45 zone. He maintained his lane. The cruiser rode his bumper so closely that David couldn't even see its headlights in his mirrors anymore. It was a classic intimidation tactic. David sighed, recognizing the maneuver instantly. He had seen it 1,000 times back in his days in Chicago. It was the calling card of a cop looking for a reason, any reason, to initiate a stop. "All right," David said softly to the empty car. "Let's see what you do." Suddenly the night exploded in red and blue strobes. The piercing wail of the police siren cut through the smooth jazz playing on David's stereo. David didn't panic. He didn't swerve. He calmly activated his right turn signal, reduced his speed gradually, and pulled over into the well-lit parking lot of a closed high-end grocery store. He put the vehicle in park, turned off the radio, and rolled down all 4 windows, a standard procedure he always appreciated when he was a patrolman, as it showed the officer there was nothing hidden in the back seat. He placed his large hands firmly on the top of the steering wheel, at the 10 and 2 positions. He was perfectly compliant, perfectly calm. He waited. Jenkins slammed his cruiser into park, unbuckled his seatbelt, and stepped out into the freezing rain. He left his high beams and his spotlight glaring directly into the BMW's driver-side mirror, designed to blind the driver and disorient them. He rested his right hand heavily on the butt of his standard-issue Glock 19. His thumb instinctively popped the retention hood of his holster. It was an aggressive, escalating move for a routine traffic stop, especially one where the driver had pulled over safely and immediately. As Jenkins approached the vehicle, his heavy boots crunching against the wet gravel, he unclipped his heavy tactical flashlight with his left hand, shining the blinding LED beam directly into David's face. "Keep your hands on the wheel where I can see them," Jenkins barked, his voice dripping with forced authority. "My hands are on the wheel, officer," David replied. His voice was deep, resonant, and entirely devoid of the fear Jenkins was so used to hearing. It was the voice of a man who commanded rooms of seasoned federal agents. Jenkins didn't like the tone. It wasn't submissive enough. "I said keep 'em there, boy," Jenkins sneered, stepping up to the driver's side door. He intentionally leaned into the window space, violating the standard distance an officer should keep for their own safety, using his physical presence to intimidate. "Whose car is this?" David didn't flinch at the racial slur. He filed it away. Over 30 years in law enforcement, he had encountered every type of bad cop. He knew exactly what he was dealing with, a man who felt small without his badge, and who used his uniform as a weapon against those he deemed beneath him. At this exact moment, David could have ended the entire interaction. He could have reached slowly to his right breast pocket, pulled out his leather credential case, and flashed the gold shield and the ID card that read, "Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Jenkins would have turned pale, stammered an apology, and practically tripped over himself, running back to his cruiser. But as David looked at the sneering face illuminated by the harsh flashlight, a different thought crossed his mind. What happens when it's not the director of the FBI sitting in this seat? What happens when it's a 19-year-old kid coming home from a late shift? What happens when it's a father who doesn't know his rights? David decided he wasn't going to play the director card. Not yet. He wanted to see exactly how Officer Bradley Jenkins operated when he thought he had absolute power over an ordinary citizen. "I asked you a question," Jenkins snapped, tapping his heavy flashlight against the roof of the expensive BMW, leaving a visible scuff mark on the pristine paint. "Whose car is this?" "The vehicle is mine, Officer," David said evenly, turning his head slightly to avoid the blinding beam of the flashlight. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" "You don't ask the questions here," Jenkins shot back. "License, registration, and proof of insurance. Now." "I am going to reach into my back right pocket for my wallet to retrieve my driver's license," David stated, broadcasting his movements perfectly. "Is that acceptable?" Jenkins scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Just get the damn ID, and move slow." David smoothly extracted his wallet and pulled out his standard Virginia driver's license. He handed it through the window. Jenkins snatched the plastic card and shined his light on it. He read the name. David Henderson. He looked at the address. 1420 Foxhall Crescent, Oak Brook, Virginia. Jenkins let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Foxhall Crescent." Jenkins said, looking back down at David with utter contempt. "You expect me to believe you live in a $5 million estate? What are you, the gardener?" "I am a resident at that address," David replied, his tone remaining terrifyingly neutral. "Again, officer, can you please articulate your reasonable suspicion for initiating this traffic stop? Was I speeding?" The legal terminology, "articulate reasonable suspicion," made Jenkins bristle. Cops like Jenkins hated citizens who knew the law. "I'm investigating a stolen vehicle," Jenkins lied smoothly. "Plates came back restricted. That usually means they're fake or cloned. Now I'm looking at a guy who claims he lives in the wealthiest zip code in the state, driving a car that costs more than my house. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Where did you steal the car?" "I didn't steal the car," David said. "The plates are restricted for security reasons. If you run the plates through your dispatcher and ask them to clear it through the NCIC federal database, it will verify the registration." "Don't tell me how to do my job," Jenkins roared, leaning closer. Spit flew from his lips and hit David's cheek. David didn't wipe it away. "Step out of the vehicle." "Under what lawful order?" David asked. "Under the order of I'm telling you to step the hell out of the car." Jenkins yelled his hand, now gripping the handle of his Glock tightly. "Pennsylvania versus Mims, you arrogant son of a bitch. I can order you out of the vehicle for officer safety. Now step out before I drag you out." David knew the case law perfectly. Jenkins was technically correct. The Supreme Court ruled that officers could order drivers out of their vehicles during a lawful traffic stop, but the stop itself had to be lawful. Jenkins had no probable cause, no traffic violation, and no legitimate, reasonable suspicion. However, David also knew that arguing on the side of a dark road with an armed, unstable officer was how people ended up dead. He wasn't going to resist physically. He was going to let Jenkins dig his own grave 6 feet deep. "I am stepping out of the vehicle," David said calmly. He unbuckled his seatbelt with his left hand, keeping his right hand visible, and slowly pushed the heavy armored door open. As David stepped out and stood up to his full 6'2" height, he towered over the 5'9" Jenkins. Jenkins instinctively took a step back, drawing his taser with his left hand while keeping his right on his gun. "Turn around and put your hands on the roof." Jenkins ordered, his voice pitching up an octave, betraying a sudden spike of adrenaline. David complied silently. He turned around and placed his hands flat on the wet roof of the BMW. "Spread your legs," Jenkins commanded, before kicking David's right ankle violently, forcing his stance wide. David felt a sharp pain shoot up his calf, but he didn't make a sound. He just stared at his own reflection in the wet window glass. "You have no idea what you've just done," David thought. 30 miles away in the heart of Washington, D.C., the J. Edgar Hoover building was mostly quiet at this hour. But on the 5th floor, The Strategic Information and Operations Center, SIOC, was fully staffed and buzzing with quiet, focused energy. The room looked like a NASA control center, filled with massive digital maps, satellite feeds, and rows of analysts working behind glowing monitors. At a dedicated workstation in the corner, Special Agent Sarah Reynolds and Special Agent Marcus Miller were assigned to the Executive Protection Detail's Overwatch desk. Their sole job was to monitor the telemetry location and security status of the director's vehicle whenever it was in motion. "Hey, Reynolds," Miller said, frowning at his screen. "Director Henderson's vehicle has been stationary for 4 minutes on Route 114. Did he pull over for gas?" Reynolds tapped her keyboard, pulling up the GPS overlay. "No gas stations at those coordinates. It's a closed commercial parking lot." She initiated a diagnostic ping to the BMW. Instantly, the dashboard on her screen lit up with alerts. "I'm showing the vehicle was subjected to a sudden deceleration," Reynolds said, her heart rate ticking up. "Running external diagnostics." With a few keystrokes, Reynolds activated Project Argus. Unbeknownst to Officer Jenkins David's BMW was equipped with 8 microscopic ultra-high-definition cameras. 2 were mounted in the side mirrors, 1 in the shark fin antenna on the roof, 1 in the grille, and 4 in the cabin. The car also had military-grade directional microphones built into the door panels and the headliner. On the massive monitor in front of Reynolds and Miller, a crystal-clear, night vision-enhanced video feed popped up. They saw Director Henderson standing in the freezing rain, his hands on the roof of his car. Behind him, holding a taser to the director's spine, was a local police officer. The audio fed directly into the agent's headsets. "Don't you flinch!" Jenkins's voice hissed through the speakers, the audio so crisp they could hear the rain hitting his uniform. "You move one muscle and I'll ride the lightning on you. You understand me?" Miller bolted upright out of his chair. "Holy hell, is that a local uniform pulling a Terry stop on the director? He's not just stopping him, he's physically assaulting him." Reynolds said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "I need an immediate patch to the trail vehicle." Within seconds, the radio line to the black Chevrolet Suburban, currently parked a mile down the road, opened up. "Overwatch, this is Trail 1. Go ahead," came the gruff voice of Supervisory Special Agent Vance, the head of David's physical protection detail. "Trail 1, you have a code yellow situation." Reynolds said, her voice tight but professional. "Local PD has initiated a traffic stop on the director's vehicle at your 12 o'clock, approximately 1.2 miles ahead. Officer has the director out of the car at taser point." There was a half-second of stunned silence on the radio. "Say again, Overwatch," Vance asked, his voice dropping an octave. "Local PD is detaining the director." "Confirmed," Reynolds said. "We have live audio and video feeds. The officer is highly aggressive. Do you want to roll up and intervene?" In the Suburban, Vance looked at his partner. They were heavily armed federal agents trained to protect the director from terrorist threats, not rogue local cops. "Overwatch stand by," Vance said. "Director Henderson specifically ordered us to hold our distance tonight. He has his credentials on him." "Why hasn't he identified himself?" Reynolds looked at the live feed. She watched as Jenkins aggressively patted down the director's pockets, pulling out his cell phone and tossing it carelessly onto the wet hood of the car. "He's playing it out," Miller realized aloud, staring at the screen. "The boss is letting the cop hang himself." "Trail 1, Reynolds transmitted. The director has not presented his credentials. He is maintaining civilian cover. Close the distance to visual range, but do not engage unless the officer attempts to place the director in handcuffs or draws his lethal weapon. Acknowledge. Trail 1 copy, closing distance, lights out." Back in the wet parking lot, Jenkins finished his aggressive pat-down. He found no weapons, no drugs, nothing but a set of keys and a wallet. Frustrated, Jenkins took a step back. "All right, tough guy. Since you want to play games, you're going to sit on the curb while I search this vehicle." David turned his head slowly. The rain was dripping down his face, but his eyes were like chips of flint. "Officer," David said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet, wet night. "I have not consented to a search of my vehicle. You have no probable cause to enter my car. The doors are locked, and they will remain locked." Jenkins let out a dark, menacing chuckle. He keyed the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Bravo. Need a secondary unit at my location, Route 114 and Elmwood. Non-compliant suspect. Possible stolen vehicle." "Copy 4 Bravo. Unit 7 is 2 minutes out." The dispatcher crackled back. Jenkins unclipped his baton. With a flick of his wrist, the heavy steel cylinder extended with a sharp clack. "You see this?" Jenkins pointed the baton at the driver's side window. "I don't need your consent. If I say I smell marijuana, I have probable cause. And right now, I smell a whole lot of marijuana coming from that stolen car. So you can give me the keys, or I can shatter this glass and take them. Your choice." David knew the glass was ballistic. Jenkins could swing that baton until his arms fell off, and he wouldn't even scratch the surface. But the threat itself was a blatant, undeniable violation of the Fourth Amendment. Jenkins was manufacturing probable cause on camera. "I do not smoke," David said. "There is no contraband in that vehicle. If you attempt to break that glass, you will be destroying federal property, and you will be facing charges that will end your career and put you in a federal penitentiary." Jenkins stopped. For a fleeting second, confusion washed over his face. The way this man spoke. It wasn't the way criminals spoke. It was precise. It was authoritative. It sounded like a judge. But Jenkins's ego quickly squashed the doubt. "Federal property." Jenkins laughed loudly. "What are you going to tell me you're an undercover FBI agent now? Is that your story?" "No," David said, looking dead into Jenkins's eyes. "I am not an undercover agent." Before Jenkins could respond, the wail of a second siren filled the air. Another Oak Brook police cruiser swerved into the parking lot, its tires hydroplaning slightly before coming to a jerking halt. The door opened and Officer Greg Thomas stepped out. Thomas was 24, fresh out of the academy. He looked nervous, his eyes darting between the massive BMW David standing in the rain and Jenkins holding a drawn steel baton. "Everything good here, Brad?" Thomas asked, keeping his hand near his belt, unsure of what the threat was. "Got a real wise guy here, Tommy." Jenkins said, his confidence bolstered by the backup, driving a stolen Beamer with restricted tags, refusing a lawful search, talking nonsense about federal property. Thomas looked at David. He didn't see a threat. He saw an older, distinguished-looking man in a tailored, albeit soaked suit, standing calmly with his hands visible. "Sir," Thomas said, respectfully, taking a step forward. "Do you have ID?" "I already gave him my license," David said, nodding toward Jenkins. "My name is David Henderson. The vehicle is registered to my employer. Officer Jenkins has refused to run the plate through NCIC to verify it and has instead decided to threaten to break my windows." Thomas looked at Jenkins. "Brad, did you run the plate through dispatch?" "I don't need to." Jenkins snapped, annoyed that the rookie was questioning him. "I'm telling you the car is dirty, and this guy is going in cuffs until he tells me the truth." Jenkins reached to his back pouch and pulled out a pair of steel handcuffs. He marched toward David. "Put your hands behind your back," Jenkins shouted. At the FBI command center, Reynolds gripped her desk. "He's going for cuffs. Trail 1, you are clear to engage. I repeat, clear to engage." "Copy that," came the immediate response over the radio. "We are 30 seconds out." In the parking lot, David didn't move his hands. He stood perfectly still. "Officer Thomas," David said, raising his voice slightly to ensure the microscopic microphones caught every syllable. "I am advising you as a sworn officer of the law to intervene. Your partner is about to make an unlawful arrest under color of law, a violation of Title 18 U.S. Code, Section 242. If you assist him, you will be named as a co-conspirator. Thomas froze. The legal jargon was too accurate. The demeanor was too calm. A cold sweat broke out on the back of the young officer's neck. "Brad, wait," Thomas said, putting a hand out. "Let's just call a supervisor. Let's run the plate through NCIC like he said. It takes 2 minutes. "Shut up, Tommy," Jenkins roared, his face flushed red with rage. He was losing control of the situation, and to a bully that was the ultimate insult. Jenkins lunged forward, grabbing David's left arm, violently attempting to wrench it behind his back. David, who had spent a decade doing apprehension training and close-quarters combat, easily shifted his weight, stiffening his arm and dropping his center of gravity. Jenkins pulled with all his might, but it was like trying to move a concrete pillar. Resisting arrest, Jenkins screamed, raising his steel baton high into the air, aiming directly for the back of David's knees to force him down. At that exact second, a matte black Chevrolet Suburban, driving with no headlights, tore into the parking lot at 60 miles an hour. The squeal of heavy-duty brake pads drowned out the relentless rain. The black Chevrolet Suburban slid at a 45-degree angle, hydroplaning perfectly, before snapping into a violently abrupt halt directly between Jenkins's cruiser and David's BMW. Before the Suburban even completely settled on its suspension, all 4 doors flew open in unison. Federal agents dropped the weapon. "Drop it now." The voices boomed like thunder, amplified by tactical throat mics. 4 men piled out of the SUV, moving with terrifying synchronized precision. They wore matte black Kevlar plate carriers over dark suits. Emblazoned across their chests and backs in stark reflective yellow lettering were 3 letters FBI. 2 agents instantly flanked the rear of the Suburban, their M4 carbine rifles raised to a low-ready position, their tactical flashlights cutting through the downpour and pinning Jenkins in a crossbeam of blinding white light. The lead agent, Supervisory Special Agent Carter, stepped directly into the space between David and the aggressive police officer. His hand was firmly planted on his holstered sidearm, his posture a coiled spring of lethal intent. Jenkins froze. His steel baton was still raised above his head, suspended in mid-air. The sudden overwhelming show of force shattered his adrenaline-fueled rage, replacing it with cold, unadulterated shock. His brain struggled to process the transition from being the undisputed apex predator of a traffic stop to being at the wrong end of federal tactical rifles. "I said, drop the weapon." "Officer." Carter barked his voice, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Jenkins's fingers went numb. The steel baton slipped from his grip, clattering loudly against the wet asphalt and rolling under the BMW. He slowly raised his hands, his eyes wide, and darting between the armed agents. Whoa, wait!" Jenkins stammered, his bravado evaporating instantly. "I'm Oak Brook PD, we're police. We're on the same team." 10 feet away, Officer Thomas had already taken his hands completely off his duty belt, holding them up by his shoulders. He looked like he was going to be sick. "Stand down, Agent Carter." David's voice cut through the tension. It was calm, steady, and carried the undeniable weight of absolute authority. "Director, are you injured?" Carter asked, keeping his eyes locked dead on Jenkins while holstering his weapon. "I am perfectly fine," David replied casually, brushing the rainwater off the sleeve of his tailored suit. He reached into his inner breast pocket, the exact movement Jenkins had forbidden earlier, and retrieved a dark leather credential case. With a flick of his wrist, David flipped it open. The gold shield of the Federal Bureau of Investigation caught the glare of the police strobes gleaming brightly in the dark. Beside it was his identification card. David took 3 deliberate steps toward Jenkins, closing the distance until he was standing uncomfortably close. He held the credentials up, ensuring Jenkins could read every single word. Officer Bradley Jenkins. David said, his tone conversational, but laced with venom. I am David Henderson, Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and you have just made the most catastrophic mistake of your life. Jenkins stared at the gold shield. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost, illuminated by the red and blue flashing lights. His jaw worked silently for a moment before he could manage to push words through his tightening throat. Director, I didn't know. Jenkins stuttered, his eyes darting frantically. The plates were restricted. I thought it was a cloned tag. You have to understand from my perspective, a guy in a car like this in this neighborhood. Stop, David commanded softly. The single word hit harder than a physical blow. Do not insult my intelligence by attempting to retroactively justify your bigotry. I know exactly what you saw. You saw a black man in a wealthy neighborhood, and you manufactured a reason to initiate a stop. You failed to verify the tags through NCIC because you didn't want the truth. You wanted a confrontation. Sir, please, Jenkins pleaded, the sweat on his forehead, mixing with the rain. The aggressive, spitting bully from 3 minutes ago was completely gone. In his place was a terrified man, realizing his pension, his career and his freedom were disintegrating before his eyes. It was a misunderstanding. I was just doing my job, protecting the community. You threatened to shatter the windows of a federal vehicle. David listed coldly, ticking the offenses off on his fingers. You threatened to fabricate probable cause by claiming you smelled narcotics. You attempted to physically assault me. And you were prepared to effect an unlawful arrest under color of law. David turned slightly, his gaze falling on the young rookie who was trembling beside his cruiser. Officer Thomas, David said. Yes, sir, Thomas choked out, standing at attention, as if he were back in the police academy facing a drill instructor. You had a choice tonight, David told him, his voice softening just a fraction. You saw your partner breaking the law and you hesitated. That hesitation is the only reason you are not leaving this parking lot in federal handcuffs. You suggested running the plates. You suggested calling a supervisor. Hold on to those instincts, son. Because if you let men like him— David pointed at Jenkins without looking at him. Teach you how to wear that badge, you will end up in a concrete cell. Thomas swallowed hard and nodded vigorously. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. David turned his attention back to Jenkins. Agent Carter, disarm Officer Jenkins. You can't do that, Jenkins protested, taking a half step back, a flash of his old arrogance briefly surfacing. You don't have jurisdiction over local police. My union rep— Carter didn't wait for Jenkins to finish. He closed the gap in a split second, grabbing Jenkins's right wrist and twisting it firmly behind his back in a standard compliance hold. With his free hand, Carter stripped the Glock 19 from Jenkins's holster, popped the magazine out, cleared the chamber, and handed the weapon to another agent. He then relieved Jenkins of his taser radio and pepper spray. Jurisdiction. David repeated, a dangerous smile touching his lips. Officer Jenkins, you violated my civil rights. That is a federal crime. I have all the jurisdiction I need. While the scene in the parking lot unfolded, the FBI command center in Washington was a hive of rapid-fire coordination. Special Agent Reynolds was already on a secure line with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, while her partner had patched a call directly to the residential landline of the Oak Brook Chief of Police, Chief Miller Fourois. Reynolds said through her headset, seamlessly managing 2 screens of data at once. This is the FBI Strategic Information and Operations Center. We have a code-red jurisdictional incident involving one of your patrol officers and the director of the FBI. You need to get to the Oak Brook Plaza parking lot on Route 114 immediately. We are sending a secure video feed to your phone right now. I suggest you watch it before you arrive. Back in the rain, Jenkins was breathing heavily, humiliated and stripped of his weapons. He glared at David. The fear was still there, but indignation was starting to seep back in. He had survived 14 excessive force complaints. He knew the system. He knew how police unions worked. "You think you can just strip my badge because you're a big shot?" Jenkins sneered, trying to salvage some shred of his shattered ego. "It's your word against mine, Director. I'll say you were combative. I'll say you refused lawful orders. My dashcam was blocked by your big armored SUV. Without video, the union will have me back on the street with back pay in a month. You're just a suit. You don't know how the street works." David actually laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound. "The street," David echoed, stepping closer. "I walked a beat in the south side of Chicago before you were even born, Jenkins. I know the street. And more importantly, I know exactly how corrupt cops try to cover their tracks." David reached into his pocket and pulled out his recovered cell phone. He tapped the screen a few times, accessing the secure portal to the SIOC servers. "You think your dashcam is the only thing recording?" David asked softly. He turned the phone screen toward Jenkins. On the screen was a high-definition, crystal-clear video of the exact moment Jenkins had leaned into the BMW. The audio played from the phone's speaker, loud and undeniable over the sound of the rain. "I'm investigating a stolen vehicle. Plates came back restricted. That usually means they're fake or cloned. Now I'm looking at a guy who claims he lives in the wealthiest zip code in the state. Where did you steal the car?" Jenkins stared at the screen, his mouth dropping open. David tapped the screen again, skipping forward. "I don't need your consent. If I say I smell marijuana, I have probable cause. So you can give me the keys, or I can shatter this glass and take them. My vehicle is equipped with Project Argus." David explained, his voice chillingly clinical. 8 hidden cameras, 4 directional microphones. It streams live encrypted data directly to the FBI command center. 24 federal agents just watched you manufacture probable cause, threaten property destruction, and attempt battery on a federal officer in real time. Jenkins looked like a man who had just been handed his own death sentence. The defiance vanished, completely annihilated by the sheer weight of the digital evidence. The union couldn't save him from this. The former chief couldn't bury this. "Oh God," Jenkins whispered, his legs suddenly looking unsteady. "Please." "You are a disgrace to the uniform," David said, his voice dropping to a low, hard register. "You use the authority granted to you by the public to terrorize the people you are sworn to protect. I have spent my entire life trying to build trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve, and cowards like you tear it down with every shift you work." Headlights swept across the parking lot as a black, unmarked police interceptor pulled in. An older man in a wrinkled suit and a raincoat stepped out, looking panicked. It was Chief Miller of the Oak Brook Police Department. He had clearly thrown his clothes on in a hurry. Chief Miller took one look at the heavily armed federal agents, his disarmed officer, and the towering figure of the FBI director, and he knew his department was in deep trouble. "Director Henderson," Chief Miller said, hurrying over, completely ignoring Jenkins. "Sir, I cannot express how deeply sorry—" "Save it, Chief," David interrupted, holding up a hand. "I don't want your apologies. I want action. Officer Jenkins has a documented history of excessive force. Your department has routinely buried those complaints. That ends tonight." "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir," the chief stammered. "I'll have him suspended, pending an internal affairs investigation, immediately." "No," David corrected him sharply. "Internal affairs isn't touching this. The Department of Justice is taking over. As of this moment, the FBI is opening a federal civil rights probe into the Oak Brook Police Department to investigate a pattern and practice of discriminatory policing." Chief Miller swallowed hard, looking like he had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. "Understood, Director." David looked at Jenkins one last time. The man was shivering, his head bowed, thoroughly broken. "Chief Miller," David said. "Order Officer Thomas to handcuff his partner. He is under arrest for violation of Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law." Jenkins looked up, tears mixing with the rain on his cheeks. "Director, please. I have a family. So do the people you pull over Jenkins," David replied without a shred of sympathy. Thomas stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled his own handcuffs from his belt. He walked behind his training officer, the man who was supposed to teach him how to be a cop. "Hands behind your back, Brad," Thomas said softly. Jenkins didn't resist. The sharp click-click of the ratcheting steel echoed loudly in the quiet parking lot. David turned away, not bothering to watch Jenkins being placed into the back of his own cruiser. He looked at Agent Carter. "Pack it up, Carter. Let the local chief process his crime scene." "Yes, sir," Carter said, motioning for his agents to fall back to the Suburban. "Do you want me to drive you the rest of the way home?" "Director 4, Bedouin." "No," David said, opening the heavy armored door of his BMW. "I'll drive myself. I think the roads are safe enough for tonight." The red numbers on the bedside clock glowed. 1:15 a.m. when David Henderson finally pulled his BMW into the sprawling driveway of his Foxhall Crescent home. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, but the emotional storm inside him was still raging. He killed the engine and sat in the dark cabin for a long moment, the silence ringing in his ears. For 30 years he had worn a badge. He had bled for the law. Yet stripped of his title and his armor, he was still just a target to men like Bradley Jenkins. When David walked through the front door, the house was quiet, but the soft glow of a reading lamp spilled from the living room. His wife Sarah was awake, curled on the sofa, with a thick legal thriller she had probably read 3 times. She had been a public defender for 2 decades before retiring. She knew the toll the streets took on a person. She took one look at his face, the rigid set of his jaw, and closed her book. "What happened?" she asked softly. David loosened his tie, suddenly feeling every single one of his 58 years. "Just a reminder," he said, walking over and kissing the top of her head. "A reminder of why I took this job in the first place." He didn't sleep. Instead, David spent the next 4 hours in his home office reviewing the case file the SIOC analysts had compiled on Bradley Jenkins and the Oak Brook Police Department. What he found made his blood run cold. Jenkins wasn't an anomaly. He was a symptom of a deeply entrenched disease. The Oak Brook Department had a staggering rate of pretextual traffic stops, resulting in asset forfeiture, disproportionately targeting Black and Hispanic drivers passing through the affluent suburb. At 6 a.m., David's encrypted secure phone buzzed. It was Special Agent Reynolds from the command center. "Director, turn on the National News Network." "Channel 4. Reynolds said, her voice tight with frustration. David grabbed the remote and flicked on the flat screen mounted on his office wall. Sitting at a pristine glass news desk was William Donovan, the aggressive, red-faced president of the State Police Benevolent Union. Donovan was a notorious political brawler who made his living defending the indefensible. Beneath Donovan's face, a sensational chyron flashed. FBI overreach local hero cop assaulted by federal hit squad. "It's an absolute disgrace," Donovan was saying to the nodding anchor. Officer Jenkins is a decorated 8-year veteran of the Oak Brook Police Department. Last night, he initiated a textbook lawful traffic stop on a suspicious vehicle with restricted, untraceable plates, a known tactic for high-end car thieves. And how is he rewarded? He is ambushed by heavily armed federal agents, held at gunpoint, and illegally detained by the director of the FBI, who decided to use his federal hit squad to settle a personal grievance. David watched his expression turning to stone. The FBI is out of control. Donovan continued looking directly into the camera. Director Henderson threw a temper tantrum because he felt he was above the law. He refused lawful orders, acted aggressively, and then called in a tactical team to terrorize a local cop. We have the dispatch audio proving Officer Jenkins called for backup because the suspect was non-compliant. We are filing a federal lawsuit this morning, and we are demanding Director Henderson's immediate resignation. Reynolds spoke through the phone. Director Donovan leaked edited dispatch audio to the press an hour ago. He cut out everything except Jenkins saying you were non-compliant and talking nonsense. The media is running with it. Half the morning shows are already framing this as a federal power trip. The White House Chief of Staff just called on line 2. They want to know how to spin this. Tell the White House to stand by. David said, his voice terrifyingly calm. And tell the Public Affairs Office we are not issuing a written statement. We are not going to debate William Donovan on morning television. Sir, with respect, we have to kill this narrative now, Reynolds urged. The public is divided. They don't know who to believe. Let them talk, Agent Reynolds, David replied, a cold, tactical brilliance forming in his mind. When you are dealing with a liar, you do not interrupt them while they are building their own trap. You wait until they step inside, and then you slam the door shut. What's your order? Director, I want a joint press conference scheduled for 11 a.m. at the Hoover Building. Contact the Attorney General's office. I want the head of the Civil Rights Division standing next to me. And Reynolds, yes, sir. I want you to pull Jenkins' personal cell phone records, the one Agent Carter confiscated. Run a full digital forensics sweep, cross-reference his text messages and encrypted apps with William Donovan's registered numbers. If Donovan is lying this boldly on national television, he's not doing it blind. He knows what Jenkins did, and he's covering it up. Consider it done, Director. By 9 a.m., the media frenzy had reached a boiling point. The story had gone viral across every major social media platform. Pundits on the right called it a gross abuse of federal power. Pundits on the left demanded transparency. The Oak Brook Police Department switchboard crashed from the sheer volume of calls. Jenkins, currently sitting in a federal holding cell, was being painted by the Union as a martyr. At 10:45 a.m., David stood in the green room behind the FBI press briefing center. Attorney General Richard Hayes, a sharp, no-nonsense prosecutor from New York, stood beside him, adjusting his tie. You sure about this play, David? Hayes asked quietly. Releasing the Project Argus footage reveals a classified surveillance capability. The intelligence committees might grumble. I'd rather burn a surveillance program than let a corrupt institution gaslight the American public, David said, buttoning his suit jacket. We are going to excise this cancer today. Agent Carter stepped into the room holding a secure tablet. He looked up at David, a grim smile spreading across his face. Director, Carter said. Digital forensics just cracked Jenkins's phone. You were right. Donovan wasn't just spinning. He was coordinating. David looked at the screen. The trap was perfectly set. The FBI press briefing room was packed to absolute capacity. Camera shutters fired like machine guns as Director David Henderson and Attorney General Richard Hayes walked out to the podium. The bright television lights reflected off the FBI seal mounted on the rich oak wall behind them. The reporters were practically shouting over one another before David even reached the microphones. David held up his hands, commanding instant silence. Good morning, David said, his deep voice carrying flawlessly across the room. Over the past 6 hours, there has been a coordinated aggressive campaign by the State Police Benevolent Union to manipulate the American public regarding an incident that occurred last night in Oak Brook, Virginia. Union President William Donovan has made severe allegations of federal overreach and abuse of power. David gripped the edges of the podium, his gaze sweeping across the sea of lenses. Mr. Donovan claimed that Officer Bradley Jenkins was conducting a textbook traffic stop. David continued. He claimed that I was combative-aggressive and that I weaponized federal agents to intimidate a local police officer. I am not going to stand here and offer you my version of events. In the year 2026, we do not have to rely on competing narratives. We have the truth. David gestured to the massive digital screen positioned to his left. My federal vehicle is equipped with a comprehensive multi-angle audio and video recording system. What you are about to see is the unedited raw footage of the encounter. I warn you, the language and behavior displayed by Officer Jenkins are deeply disturbing. David nodded to the technician in the back. The screen flickered to life. The crystal-clear night vision footage from the BMW's exterior cameras began to play. The audio pumped through the briefing room's state-of-the-art speakers. The room went dead silent as they watched Jenkins approach the car. They heard the aggressive, unprovoked hostility. They gasped audibly when Jenkins leaned into the window and snarled, "I said keep 'em there, boy." For 8 grueling minutes, the press corps watched a masterclass in police corruption and racial profiling. They watched David remain perfectly calm, perfectly compliant, reciting the law, while Jenkins grew increasingly unhinged. They watched Jenkins threaten to shatter the window, fabricate a narcotics charge, and violently kick David's ankle. When the footage finally showed the black Suburban sliding into frame and the federal agents disarming Jenkins, a collective breath left the room. The video faded to black. The silence in the press room was absolute heavy with shock and outrage. The narrative William Donovan had spent the entire morning building had just been incinerated in front of the entire country. "As you can see," David said, breaking the silence, "Officer Jenkins was not a hero conducting a textbook stop. He was a predator looking for a victim. But the tragedy of this situation doesn't end with one rogue officer." David signaled the technician again. The screen shifted, displaying a sprawling digital web of text messages, timestamps, and phone numbers. Early this morning, federal agents executed a digital search warrant on Officer Jenkins' confiscated cellular device. David announced, his voice ringing with righteous fury. What we uncovered was a private encrypted group chat titled The Night Shift. This group contained 13 active Oak Brook police officers, as well as Union President William Donovan. Gasps rippled through the press corps. Pens flew across notepads. "This was not an informal chat," David explained, pointing to the screen. "It was an active, coordinated conspiracy. These officers were running an illegal competition. They actively hunted for minority drivers operating luxury vehicles in affluent neighborhoods. They used the restricted plate loophole as a guaranteed excuse to bypass probable cause. They shared tactics on how to intentionally disable their body cameras and dashcams, how to fabricate reasonable suspicion, and how to maximize asset, civil forfeiture seizures from these drivers." David paused, letting the sheer magnitude of the corruption sink in. "And Union President William Donovan." David continued, his eyes burning into the cameras, knowing Donovan was likely watching from his office, was not just aware of this ring, he was coaching them. "We have retrieved messages from Mr. Donovan explicitly promising these officers that he would personally bury any excessive force complaints that arose from these illegal stops, just as he tried to do this morning on national television." Attorney General Hayes stepped up to the microphone, his face a mask of prosecutorial grit. 10 minutes ago, Hayes stated, heavily armed agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation raided the headquarters of the State Police Benevolent Union. William Donovan has been placed under federal arrest. He is being charged with conspiracy to deprive civil rights, obstruction of justice, and racketeering. Furthermore, all 13 officers involved in the night shift chat have been taken into federal custody. The room erupted. Reporters were shouting questions, completely ignoring protocol, desperate to get more details on the massive sweep. David stepped back up to the microphone, cutting through the chaos. "Law enforcement is a sacred trust," David said, his voice echoing with 30 years of conviction. When a police officer pins a badge to their chest, they make a covenant with the public. They promise to be a shield. But when men like Bradley Jenkins and William Donovan twist that shield into a weapon of prejudice and greed, they poison the well of justice for every good, honest cop trying to do their job. David looked down at his hands, the same hands Jenkins had ordered onto the roof of the car just hours prior. I survived last night because I had a federal tactical team a mile away, David concluded quietly, staring directly into the main broadcast camera. But the citizens of this country do not have an FBI Overwatch detail. They only have the law. And it is my solemn duty, and the duty of the Department of Justice, to ensure that the law protects them equally. We will root out this corruption badge by precinct by precinct, until the covenant is restored. Thank you. David turned and walked off the stage, leaving the press room in a frenzy of flashing lights and shouting voices. He had won the battle. He had dismantled a corrupt ring and exposed a rotten union boss. But as he walked down the quiet, secure hallway of the Hoover building, David Henderson knew the truth. The war wasn't over. It was a daily, relentless grind against the darkest parts of human nature. But as he felt the heavy gold shield resting in his breast pocket, he knew he was exactly where he needed to be. He was the director. And he was just getting started. If this story of accountability and justice resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. True change happens when we shine a light on the truth and demand better from those sworn to protect us. Please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with your friends and family to keep the conversation going, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, real-life stories of justice prevailing against the odds. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Director Henderson's shoes? Stay safe, stay vigilant, and we will see you in the next video.